is starting. Now it says live.
Okay, hi everybody. I think we're live. Sometimes there's a little bit of a delay, like it says that we're live, but then it takes like a few seconds for it to actually catch up. So I think by now we should be live. Hi, I'm Jacqueline, and today it's Monday, September 21st, and that means that today is the day we are starting our FaLaLa sew-along. So today we won't actually be doing any blocks. What I did for this sew-along was, for the first day today, I'm releasing all of the embroidery patterns. Since this is a block a week, I thought I would give you a week, kind of a week head start, a week's worth head start, so that you could start doing your embroidery if you wanted to. Give you a little bit of a chance to catch up so you don't feel like you're behind. If you ordered the panels, you won't need those till next week. So if you ordered them recently and you're still waiting for them to come, or if you haven't ordered them yet and you want to use them next week, you should still have time. So anyway, if you're not signed up yet, if you're like, what is this FaLaLa sew-along? What is she talking about? This is our brand new sew-along that we are starting, like I said, today. And in the description to this video, I've put the link there for you to go and sign up. I think it's like jacquelinesteves.com/FaLaLa or something pretty easy like that. You just click on that link and it will take you to that page. And you can sign up. And what happens when you sign up is you will get emails every week when we release the blocks. So the blocks are also going to appear on that page on my website, on the blog. But just in case, it's always good to get a reminder, get that email and remind you to go and get your block to download it. Especially because at the end of this sew-along, we're going to take down all of those free patterns and it will be available for sale on my website. So if you're signing up and you're doing it with us now, you're getting a really awesome project for free, which will be available for sale on the website later on. So good for you. Yay, free stuff. Okay, so a little bit about the FaLaLa sew-along. This was something, well, let's go back to the spring when all that craziness started. We do a block of the month every year, and it was originally planned to start this summer, and then all the craziness happened in the spring with COVID, and so we did a poll and we asked some people in our group, and it just seemed like it wasn't a good time to start a big project like a big block of the month because everything was uncertain. People couldn't get out to the stores anyway to do their shopping and that kind of thing. So we postponed that, but we felt like we really need to have something to do to kind of take our minds off of all of the stress that was kind of happening in our everyday lives. So we really quick took that block of the month and said, okay, we're going to push that to 2021. And we started the Silver Lining Sew-Along. So we got a tremendous response to the Silver Lining Sew-Along. So if you did that with us, this is going to look familiar. I'm just going to show you my quilt really quick. This was my quilt for the Silver Lining Sew-Along. It was just a bunch of easy blocks. And then we also had like a bonus, little bonus wall hanging project. And you could use any block for your wall hanging. So the quilt called for 12 blocks. So this pattern had 12 piece blocks and 6 embroidery patterns. And you could use all piece blocks. You can mix and match them if you wanted to. So like I said, this was our sew-along for the summer. And now it is available on our website. You can either get the digital version or we actually have little books printed up. So if you want to get a printed copy, maybe you didn't print it out, you read patterns on your iPad and you would like to have a printed copy, you can order it from us. If you want to be able to give it away as a gift, you can order the book. What's different about this is we've included coloring pages for each of the blocks so that you can practice your colors, because we were talking in this sew-along about values of fabrics, and so you can see the illustrations are in black and white because I wanted you to be able to go through your scrap fabrics. So like I said, we were doing this at a time when people really couldn't get out to the shops to do much shopping. So this was kind of a stash buster where you could go through your scraps if you wanted to, or the stash that you already had, and not have to use particular colors. So this is the book. It's available on the site. You can also get the digital version, and we've put the link to that in the description to this video as well. So I also wanted to give you a really quick kind of a sneak peek at the block of the month for next year. So remember, this is the one that we were supposed to be doing this year. We pushed it off to 2021. So it's probably going to be starting at the very beginning, January or February of 2021. And so you'll be getting more information about this. Pretty much as soon as we finish FaLaLa, we're going to start talking about next year's block of the month, which is called My Hometown. So today you're going to get a little sneak peek at the 2 different colorways of the kits that we're going to have available. So we're doing a spring colorway and we're doing a summer colorway. Now these kits will be available for sale on our website. You do not have to purchase the kit in order to do the block of the month with us. You can just get the free pattern and use whatever fabric you have on hand, but if you want to get these really pretty fabric kits, they will be available on our website probably in the next month or so when we start talking about the My Hometown block of the month. So that's something else to look forward to once we get done FaLaLa. So you might notice this quilt behind me, which is, I'm going to step to the side a little bit. Is this cute or what? So we've got our penguin, polar bear, snowman, our heart. This just happened to be hanging there because I was taking pictures of it last week and I was like, it's cute. It'll be Christmas before I know it. I'm just going to leave it up. This was actually a project for the Art of Home Club, and it had this really cute wall hanging to go with it. And you might notice that the bear in this one is done with embroidery, and then these I did with machine applique. So the reason I'm bringing this up is in October, we are going to be opening up the club for new enrollment, for new members. So if you're not familiar with what the Art of Home Club is, it's a private club. You pay $10.95 per month. You get exclusive patterns every month. And then you also get tons and tons of bonus content. The Art of Home Club members actually got their embroidery patterns yesterday because a lot of times when we're putting stuff out, they get their stuff early, like as a bonus for being a club member. We do swaps, which are really fun. So I just wanted to show you. Right now we are in the middle of a pincushion swap, and this whole basket is full of pincushions, which are going to be sent out to our members. We're going to swap them for them, and everybody who sent one in is going to get a pincushion back from another member. So swaps are really fun. Everybody loves doing the swaps. We have done, like I said, those are pincushions. That's the first time we've ever done a pincushion swap, and we've had a tremendous reaction to that. People love that. We've also done mug rug swaps. We've done ornament swaps where we donate, where we have people send in like 2 ornaments or 2 mug rugs, and one of those gets swapped. They get one back, and then the other one gets donated to like a local nursing home or Meals on Wheels. So it's a nice kind of it's a swap, but it's also like charity sewing at the same time. So that's another thing we do in the Art of Home Club. So if you think you might be interested, there's a link in the description to this video for the Art of Home Club. Go sign up, get on our waiting list, because we only open a few times per year. And when we do open, the people who are on that waiting list get a couple of extra emails with specials in them, like promotions for like free projects. So if you get on our waiting list, you'll find out about when we make this available as a free bonus when you sign up for the Art of Home Club. So you definitely don't want to miss out on that. So make sure you go over after this video and sign up for that, the Art of Home Club waiting list. So let's talk about the actual FaLaLa sew along. So I mentioned the panels. We're doing 2 versions of this. We're doing what we're calling holiday, which is like a wreath and holly and a couple of blocks that say FaLaLa or Let's Deck the Halls. And then we're also doing a Christmas version, which is has more of like a religious theme to it. So this was the Christmas version. These are the embroidery panels. And these can go into your blocks if you want. And then this would be the holiday version with the FaLaLa and Deck the Halls and the little wreath and the holly. So like I said, you still have time to order them. A lot of you have already ordered them and gotten them. I'm going to show you a really quick preview of, remember I said next week is the week that the first block is going to come out. So if you were doing the holiday version, you're going to get a peek at the very first block. If you're doing the holiday version, And you'll notice I've got this all pinned up because I've got my table runner put together, and this is just a sneak peek. I am not showing you the whole thing right now. I'm just showing you block number 1. So this is where I hand embroidered the FaLaLa. And here's the version where we used the panel. This was the Christmas panel, and this one's already quilted and everything. This one is already done. So that's just a little sneak peek of, just so you can kind of get an idea of how these little panels and embroidery squares are going to work. So I am going to give you an embroidery demonstration today. I know a lot of you like to do embroidery. A lot of you say either you never learned it or you used to do it and you would like to get back into doing it. So that's why today I wanted to do a demonstration for you. Now I do have a bunch of embroidery videos on my YouTube channel, but I thought I would do one today specifically for FaLaLa, so you can kind of get an idea of what we're going to be doing. These are going to be really, really super easy embroideries. I think we're doing 3 stitches. We're doing back stitch, we are doing a French knot, and I think just one of the designs, the holly and the FaLaLa, have a satin stitch where you're going to like fill in a section. And that's it. That's all you need to know to do these embroidery blocks. So the first thing I want to show you is the patterns, what they're going to look like when you print them out. So if we can get a little close up of our patterns, you're going to notice that you've got one sheet, which is the color patterns, and then you're going to have 8 sheets, 4 blocks for the Christmas version and 4 blocks for the holiday version, which are in black and white. So the first thing I want you to notice that the color ones, see how small these are? This is just for reference. This is just so that when you're stitching, you've got something to look at to see the suggested colors. These are the ones, the black and white ones are the ones that you're actually going to be tracing onto your fabric, okay? Because these are the full-size ones. This square that you see is 4 inches. So when you cut this out, this is just kind of a guideline to show you how it's going to sit in the square. This is your stitch line, your seam allowance. So actually, when you trim down your fabric, you're going to trim it to 4.5 inches. So you're going to be cutting 1/4 inch outside of that line. And it says right here, embroider the design onto a 6-inch white square, trim the square to 4.5 inches, and see the color guide, which is this, for suggested colors. So I just wanted you to be aware of why we have 2 different kinds of patterns in the embroidery pattern document. So this is, I'm going to move these out of the way so that they're not distracting. All right, so this is my fabric. This is just a white fabric. This was included in the fabric requirements in the introduction. So this is about a 6-inch square. And what I did, I fused some lightweight interfacing to the back. Now, that's optional. That's an optional product. I happen to really like this for embroidery. We sell this in the shop. And the link is in the...
Pull it closer to you.
There we go.
Just on the table's fine.
The link is in the description to this video so that if you want to get this, you can purchase it in our shop. So this is what it looks like. I will show you. It's really thin, so you can see how sheer that is, and it fuses right on. So what you would do is cut a piece a little bit smaller than your square, and then you iron it right to the back, and it will stick right on there. And the reason I like this is it gives a little bit more sort of body to your fabric, and it kind of hides some of those threads and stuff on the back. So I just think it makes it neater if you use this. But again, this is optional. You don't have to use the interfacing. So I ironed that to the back of my fabric, and then I used a light box to trace my pattern on. So this was the pattern that I used. And if you don't have a light box, you can use a sunny window. Just like put this up in your window, tape it there, put the fabric over it, and then you'll be able to see through it to trace it. So there are a couple different kinds of pens you can use. You can use like a washout embroidery pen, which is usually blue in color. I happen to really like the friction pens. These are also available in our shop if you wanted to try one. Now the reason I like this is because when you stitch over your lines, sometimes they don't get covered all of the way. When you touch this with an iron when it's done, the heat will make this line completely disappear and you will not be able to see it. So that's why I like this, because then I end up with no stray lines. With the blue embroidery marker, the washout one, I found sometimes when I'm rinsing all my lines out, sometimes that blue, it's hard to get out. I find that it migrates on the fabric and it just kind of moves around and it's hard to get out. This I really like. Now the only time you don't want to use a friction pen is, say you are entering a quilt in a competition and you're going to be shipping it off. What happens is, remember I said how this gets removed when you use heat, like a hot iron? If it gets cold enough, like in, like in a truck or an airplane when they're transporting, when you're shipping these things, the lines can come back. And I have heard of competition quilts being disqualified because traced lines came back onto the fabric. So that is a time when you don't want to use this. But what you can do is, remember how I said you iron your interfacing on first and then you trace? Sometimes I trace and I forgot to put the interfacing on the back. So you know what I do? I take this piece of fabric, let's say, so I traced it and then I was like, oh darn, I forgot my interfacing. I'll iron it, put the interfacing on with my iron. The lines have disappeared. I stick this piece of fabric in my freezer for a few minutes and the cold makes the lines come back again. So I can proceed with my embroidery. So that's why I really like the friction pen. It's my favorite. Like I said, there are a lot of different pens you can use. I recommend, trying a bunch of things and see what you like best. So the next thing we're going to need, what we really need if you're like me, you need a pair of magnifying glasses. I cannot do any kind of handwork without my magnifiers. You also need some good light. I find that the later it gets at night, the darker it gets harder and harder to see embroidery. So, you can buy one of those lights if you want. So I've got an embroidery hoop here. This is a 5-inch. A 4 or 5-inch will work really well for this. Now we do sell the hoops in the shop, the online shop. I recommend the 4-inch one for this. And you put the smaller ring on the back with the lip. I don't know if you can see, but there's like a lip here. The lip is going to go down, and then this is going to go on the top. And then I can just take this and tighten this screw. And it's going to tighten that hoop up. And I want the fabric nice and taut. This I find makes it so much easier to do embroidery. There are some people who do not use a hoop for embroidery. So you can try it both ways. I find that I definitely need the hoop to hold my fabric nice and taut. So you can see I'm just kind of tightening that fabric up a little bit as I tighten the screw. And now my embroidery is ready to work on. So you'll notice that I've got, for this one I've got a few different colors of thread. Our color guide is showing us, we're doing this one. Our color guide is showing us blue and a gold color. So I've got my blue. Now what I'm going to recommend for the gold is don't pick anything too light because it's not going to show up on your white fabric. So always, if you're using something like a yellow, always err to going a little bit darker than you think you need. So I've got this dark gold one. This one's almost kind of an orange color, and I might even use that because if you use something too light on your white fabric, it's going to get lost. You just won't be able to see it from very far, and so you want to make sure that you can see what you're embroidering. So I'm going to be working today. I've got my scissors, I've got my needles. Now I like to use darners. A lot of people use chenille needles. There are regular embroidery needles. I find that I like a long needle. The darners are really long. So that's why I like these. You can use an embroidery needle or a chenille needle. The disadvantage to these is that the eye is pretty small. So the maximum number of threads you can get away with for the darners really is 3. You can't get more than 3 pieces of thread in there. So I've got one ready to go, but you know what? Let me just show you. This is a 6-strand embroidery floss. This is Aurifil. DMC makes it. There's a brand called Anchor. There's one called Cosmo. There's a lot of different 6-strand embroidery flosses. So what you're going to do for any of the ones that you use is cut about, I'm going to say about 18 inches. You don't want it so long that it's going to get tangled, but you don't want it so short that you're going to be constantly having to rethread your needle. Okay, and then what you do is you're going to separate out your strands. So for this, our instructions say, on my embroidery patterns, I'll always tell you how many strands to use. You see here it says 3 strands of floss. You could also, these are small designs, so you could use 2 if you wanted to. I'm using 3 because I tend to use 3 when I can because I just like my design to kind of pop out. So I'm separating out 3 strands of floss. I've got 3 left over here which I can use later. And then what I do is I just kind of, I'll reassemble them. I'll line up the ends, and then if I need to, I can snip these ends so that they're all even, so that I can put that in my needle. So that's something you want to do when you're going to do embroidery is separate those strands. And what I like to do when I'm working on a project is I will spend like an hour cutting and separating, and I will thread a whole bunch of needles. That way when I go to sew, I can just sew and keep going without stopping every single time to kind of reload my needle. So I'm going to put those magnifiers on because I need them. All right, and I'm going to show you a back stitch today. So you know what, I'm going to start with the U. So I'm going to start here. Now I've put a tiny square knot, just an overhand knot at the end of my thread, and I left, I don't know, maybe 3/4 to an inch at the end. Some people say don't ever put a knot on the back of your embroidery. Other people say it's fine, put the knot there. I just use a small one to kind of keep it in place. But then what I do is when as I'm stitching, I will kind of weave that tail into the stitches on the back to kind of just reinforce it, keep it anchored. So back stitch, I come up to the top, I go down, and then I'm going to come back up again at the same time. I pull it, not too tight. I don't want to pucker my fabric, but I don't want it loose on the top either. So I'm going to do that again. So I'm going to go back down. So I'm going back. So that's how you get the back stitch name. So I'm going to go back down into that hole of my previous stitch. And I'm going to come up a little bit beyond it. And that's how I'm going to make my next stitch. And it takes a little bit of practice to get your stitches consistent in length. Another way you can do it, if you don't want to go down and then come back up again, you can do something called, some people call it stab stitching, where you go down, take your stitch, and then you come back up and take the next stitch. So you can do, it takes a little bit longer to do it that way, but some people find that they get a better result. So just practice. You can do, if you can do a back stitch, a satin stitch, and a French knot, you can pretty much do just about any embroidery pattern because those are the really basic stitches. So I'm going back to the end of the previous stitch, and then I'm going to come up forward a little bit beyond where that stitch is coming up. Can you guys see that? And then I'm going to pull that. All right, I'm going to do a couple more just in case you missed it. Now here for this, I'm going to come, I'm at the end of that little curve of that U. I'm going to come right up to the top. And I'm going to, then I can start here. Now when you're doing curves, you want to use smaller stitches. Like going around this curve, I'd want to use smaller stitches. Doing this S, I would definitely want to use very small stitches. As small as I can make them, you'll get a nicer curve that way. And again, the more you practice, the better you're going to get at this. Okay. So that one there we go. Okay. Are there any questions before we move on to...
All right, so I got a couple requests to zoom in more, so I'm going to try and zoom in more.
Okay.
So can you hold it there?
Sure. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to finish this, and I'm going to go to a different section, and I'll do the whole process again.
There was a question on why you deconstruct the thread.
It just makes it lay flatter. If you notice, here's the one that this one. I had pulled 3 strands out and I left, this is the way it was on the skein. It's kind of, it can be wrapped around the strands can be wrapped around each other. So if you take the time to separate them, you'll get more uniform stitches because you won't have any sections of thread where the strands are kind of wrapped around each other.
And what kind of thread are you using?
This is Aurifil, and it's a 6-strand cotton floss. If you don't have access to Aurifil, you can also use DMC, which is very widely available. There are other brands like Anchor and Cosmo, and they're all 6-strand flosses.
Okay.
All right, let me show you. I'm going to show you how I'm going to finish this off. I've got a mess back there. I'm just going to trim this. Oh, I trimmed the whole thing off. Oops. All right, so I'll have to redo that again later. All right, I think I'm going to do this C because, I'm going to just start with the L because it's in the middle and I think it'll be easier for you to see the bigger letter. So I've got that.
Gold on that?
You're
not doing gold on that?
No, because this is just demo and the gold isn't going to show up. So I've got my tail there. And I'm going to go down. Now remember how I said I like to catch that tail on the end in my stitch? So for the first few stitches, I will flip this over. Let's see, my needle has to come up there. I will flip this over and I will just make sure that tail gets caught. See, I'm going to catch it in the back with that stitch. And I'll just do that for a couple of stitches. I don't do that the whole time. I'll just do that for, a couple of stitches to make sure that the end is really good and anchored. Okay, so I'm going to go down and I'm going to come back up again right in front of that previous stitch. Can you guys see that better now that I'm using the bigger letter to do this? Okay, so that's one way to do the back stitch. The other way, remember, is to do what's called stab stitching and just do one part of the stitch at a time. So I can come up, come all the way up, and then go all the way down into where that previous stitch ended. And if you can make pretty small stitches, I think it looks neater. I've never taken the time to count how many stitches per inch I do, but as long as they're consistently sized, you'll get nice looking embroidery. Like I said, then when you go to a curve, you want to get a little bit smaller so that you can get around that curve. Okay, so that's that. I'm just going to snip that off because this is just a demo. The next thing I wanted to show you was how to do a French knot. So the French knot we're going to use here for the dot on our eye. And French dots tend to be like isolated from each other. So you don't want to, like if you were doing the eye, let's just say you had just finished this eye. Let's say you had just stitched that whole thing. What you wouldn't want to do is take your thread and just run it all the way up. Because what can happen is you can get that thread on the back will show through to the front. The interfacing does help with that. But since I'm using a dark color, I don't want that thread running on the back. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make another square knot, but I'm going to give myself at least a couple of inches of tail on my thread. And then to do the French knot, I'm going to come up through the fabric. You want to hold the needle really close to the fabric and wrap it 2 or 3 times. I usually do 3. Can you see it's wrapped 3 times? and then I pull it tight, and then I go back down into the fabric right next to where I brought the thread up. You don't go back into the same hole because it will just pull out. Okay, so you're just coming in like right next to it, and okay, you pull it tight, and there's your French knot. And then what I do, since I don't want what they call traveling threads, I don't want to be running that thread all the way across the back of my embroidery, I usually just, I'll tie that off, make a nice secure little knot. I've got these cute stork embroidery scissors in the shop too. They come in a few different colors, and I think everybody needs to have a stork pair of embroidery scissors because they're just cute and they're sort of traditional. Okay, so there's my French knot, and I'm going to do a whole bunch more of those because I know I did that kind of quick. So let me just get more thread here. So I'm just making an overhand knot. Doesn't want to cooperate. Okay. Overhand knot. Gonna leave myself a tail. I'm just gonna make a whole bunch of French knots just so you can see it several times. So I'm just gonna do it in here. Let's just pretend this is part of the design, okay? All right. So I pull my thread all the way up. The really important thing when you're making a French knot is you don't want to wrap all the way up here, because what happens is you go to put your needle back down, you end up with like this big clumpy knot on the top. The secret to getting a nice French knot is to wrap it and then pull it so that it's really close to the fabric. See how close that is? And see how it's already making a knot on the needle, and then I put the needle back down right next to the hole where it came up. Okay, so there's my French knot. And I'm going to do another one to show you, just in case you missed that. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Oops, came undone. 2, 3. You can wrap it, if you want a smaller knot, you can wrap it twice. If you want a bigger knot, you can wrap it 4 times. I just think 3 is a good number. So I've got my knot on the needle. I get it as close to the fabric as I can, and then my needle is going down right next to where the needle came up at the beginning. And you want to pull kind of slowly. I don't know if you noticed that it kind of started to tangle a little bit there when I was pulling to make the knot, and I slowed down so I could kind of stop that knot from happening, like a big clunky knot happening on the front. And sometimes you're going to get a big clunky knot on the front. So you just cut it out and you just start again. Okay, I think I'll just do one more of these. 2, 3. All right, there are my French knots. So I would be using a French knot there on that dot for that eye. Okay, so let's look one more time at, here. This is going to be the first block, and the first block says FaLaLa, and you can see this is just back stitch, and this is a satin stitch. You know what? Let me take a minute and show you guys a satin stitch, since you're going to need that for this. All right, so I'm just going to draw. I'm going to pretend that I need to fill that in. Okay. So a satin stitch is filling in this space. So let's see. So for the FaLaLa block, you'll need it for the music notes, and then when you get to the holly, you're going to need it for the berries. I think those are the only 2 times that you use it. So what you do is I kind of start in the middle of the shape right on the line, and then I go down right across from there. And then I will come back next to that. And I will just keep going right on that line and that will fill my shape in. Okay, can you guys see that? Where I'm just coming up right on the drawn line of the shape, and I'm getting really close to the previous stitch. I don't want to use the same hole, but I do want to get really close to that previous stitch, as close as I can. And then if you find that you've got gaps, you can go back and add a little stitch or two to kind of fill it in if you want to. So that's how you're going to do the satin stitch. So today we've learned 3 stitches. We have learned the back stitch, we've learned the French knot, and we've learned the satin stitch. Okay, before we go, I just want to see if there are any other questions. Does anybody have any questions about the sew along, or about the block of the month, or the Art of Home Club? This is your chance to ask questions.
Let me get the camera back up. Okay, so someone was asking the difference between Aurifil and DMC.
Okay, well, I don't technically know the difference. I know that Aurifil uses different kinds of cotton. I find that the DMC has a little bit more of a sheen to it. The other thing is DMC comes in one of those skeins, which I don't have one to show you. But you may, this is the DMC floss that like your grandmother used, where it's sort of wrapped like this, and then it's got the 2 little paper wrappers on it. Sometimes I have a hard time pulling it out of the skein. I end up with a giant knot. So one of the things I really love about Aurifil is I love the spool that it comes on. It never ever tangles coming off of the spool, and that's one of my very favorite things about the Aurifil. So those are a few differences between the Aurifil and the DMC.
What's the advantage of using interfacing? I've been doing embroidery since the 60s and never used it before.
Okay, so the interfacing is optional. I just like it because it gives the fabric a little bit more body. I feel like it holds those stitches a little bit better, and it covers up if you've got like threads traveling on the back or little tail ends or something like that. It helps cover up, helps keep them from showing through to the front of your fabric. But if you've been doing embroidery and not using the interfacing and you're happy with it, that's fine. It's an optional step. I happen to really like using the interfacing.
Do you ever use wax to coat your thread? It keeps it from tangling.
I do not. I have heard that a lot of people do that, especially for hand quilting. I'm not a hand quilter. Honestly, I've never used wax on my embroidery floss. I don't really have much of a problem with it tangling. If you're having a problem with the tangling, you could try something like wax. You could also try, what was I going to say? You could, I know. Don't cut your threads too long, because then they have more of a chance to tangle. And then the other thing I also do is if I find that my thread starts to tangle, I will go to the back. I will take my needle. I'll either take the needle off, or if I don't want to have to re-thread it, I'll push the needle all the way like to the back of the fabric, and I'll take that strand and I'll kind of like untangle it. Sometimes as you're stitching, it tends to like the thread is like turning and turning as you're stitching, and you can end up with some tangles and stuff. So what you can do is just take your needle all the way to the bottom where the fabric is, and then kind of like give it an untwist and straighten it out, and then you can continue stitching there.
All right. Is this just cotton or special fabric?
This fabric, this is just simply 100% quilting cotton. I think this is a Bella Solid. There are lots of different fabrics that you can get. It can be, you can even use like the tone-on tones. A lot of times I'll use a tone-on tone for like really subtle, like a really subtle background. It doesn't have to be solid white. If you decide to use something that has a little bit of a pattern in it, just make sure that it's not too distracting and it's going to take away the focus on the embroidery.
How do you end the stitching?
Oh, okay. So what I do...
Hold on.
You know what? Yeah, I was going to do that, and then I started stitching and I forgot. Let me just...
Back up a bit.
This way?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Let me do a few stitches, and I will show you how. Basically, you're just going to weave that, some stitches along the back. So let's just say I'm going to do some really quick back stitches here. Some really quick and not too neat or pretty, but we're going to be looking at the back anyway. Okay, so let's say I've just got done doing some stitching and I'm ready to finish it off. What you do is, see that line of stitches on the back? You just kind of weave. I usually go at least 2 directions. So I will go that way for a few stitches, and then I will come back the other way for a few stitches. Sometimes I'll even go back a 3rd time. And then you can just snip that really close to the fabric. That's it. So that's how you would end your stitching.
Okay.
Okay. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, there's a couple more. Hold on.
Okay.
Use a screw hoop. Can you use a spring hoop?
A spring hoop. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I would say I'm going to assume it's not something for like rug hooking or something like that that has like those little needles that actually pierce your fabric. If it's a hoop that keeps the fabric intact but gets it nice and taut, and if you can handle it easily, it probably will work fine.
Does the interfacing need to be cut so it's stitched in when you attach the block?
No. I usually do. I usually cut it at least so if I'm going to have to trim this block to 4.5 inches, I will cut my interfacing a little bit bigger than that, and then all the interfacing. Let's say I'm done with this and I'm going to trim it down. I would normally trim it so that all of the interfacing goes into the block. You don't have to do it that way. What you can do once you're done, let's say I've got this whole thing stitched, you can actually...
Sorry, I can't see that.
Okay. So let's say I have this whole thing stitched. If you don't want to put the entire thing into the... I would either put the entire square of interfacing into the quilt block, or very carefully, you can take a pair of scissors, and these are probably a little too small for this job, but... And then what you would do is really carefully trim away any excess. You're going to loosen it because we've ironed it down. You would trim away any excess interfacing and just leave it there around the stitches. You can do it that way. I prefer to have the entire square of interfacing sewn into the seam allowance with the background fabric. I just think it's nice and neat that way. It's very lightweight. I mean, it really doesn't make any difference in the finished weight of your quilt or anything like that. So I hope that answers that question. Any other questions?
Let me see. Someone works a spring hoop. They use them all the time.
Okay, so somebody's saying spring hoop will work fine for this?
Yep. Someone else asked for the size of the block, but I think a couple people answered them. So it's a 6-inch square, right?
You're going to cut it 6 inches, but then you're going to trim it down to 4.5. So the reason that I do that, and I know a lot of people who do embroidery do that. One, if you only cut this 4.5 inches, you're going to need a really small hoop to fit it into. Second, when you do embroidery or applique, you tend to get distortion of your fabric. You know, you're pulling it in the hoop, you're kind of working it around. You're not going to end up with a perfect square at the end like you had cut at the beginning. So I always think it's better to cut it a little bit big, do your embroidery or your applique, and then trim it. Now, what you can do, actually, something that's good to mention. Remember I was saying how this is my seam allowance? The square that's on the pattern. So what I like to do once I finish my embroidery or my applique is I'll go back to my light box and I'll line up my stitches with the design, and then I'll take like my friction pen or something like that, and I will mark that square. I'll mark just the corners of the square. I can't see it, but let's just pretend that I can see it because it's on a light box. So I will mark the corners of the square and pretend that I've already pressed this. It should be pressed so you don't have this ring around it. But then when I'll mark the corners of the square, and then I trim it, I trim 1/4 of an inch outside that line. But what that helps me do is, did you ever trim a block and it's really lopsided and you end up like cutting off part of your embroidery, or it's just like really not centered? So if you use, that's the reason I put this box around my patterns. So you can use that as a guideline. Once you have finished your stitching, press this so it's nice and flat, and then put it back over the pattern and mark those lines, and then you're going to have sort of a guideline for when you do your trimming, when you trim this back down to size. So remember, we're going to start with a square that's about 6 inches square. You're going to do your embroidery, and then you're going to press it, and then you're going to trim this to 4.5 inches. Don't trim it to 4 inches, it won't be big enough. The finished square is 4 inches, so like in this block, the finished square, this is 4 inches, but you need 1/4 of an inch around all of those edges for your seam allowance, so don't forget to include that. And it's written on the pattern. The pattern says to trim to 4.5 inches, so just follow the pattern and you should be fine.
How big are your stitches? 1/8 or 1/4 inch?
Well, definitely not 1/4 of an inch. Like I said, I never really measured. 1/8 of an inch. Yeah, 1/8 of an inch might be a little bit on the big side. Start with inches that are about 1/8 of an inch, and then when you're going around curves or as you get better, you can make them a little bit smaller than 1/8 of an inch.
The panels. Can you embroider the panels if you purchase them?
You could. So let's take a look at the holly or the holiday one. You could just do like a back stitch over the letters, and you would use a satin stitch in there and use matching thread and try to just cover the line completely. So you could do that for the holiday ones. For the Christmas ones, this is more of like a heavier font. I don't know if you can see the font has like some wide sections and some narrow sections. So what you might want to do is maybe embroider around the edge of the letters.
Because it's a satin stitch?
You could, it would be a lot of satin stitch to fill that in. The problem with doing a lot of satin stitches, sometimes your fabric can start to pucker. So if you're going to do a lot of satin stitch, make sure that you are using a hoop and that your fabric is really nice and taut. And every once in a while, take it out of the hoop and kind of check the fabric and make sure that it's not all puckering. You want it to still lay, as flat as possible. So that for the smaller words, you might be able to cover like just by using a back stitch right over the letters.
But you can use the panels without.
But the panels were intended to be used without embroidery for people who either don't have time or don't want to do embroidery. So that's really up to you. I mean, the star would be really easy to do embroidery over those little lines. So that's up to you.
Can I tea dye the panel?
You can use whatever method. I don't typically tea dye, so I'm not going to get into that today because I don't really remember how to make it color fast. However you're going to heat or however you're going to set that color with the tea dye, yes. You would just tea dye these just the way you would do with a regular fabric, a muslin or something, and then you could go ahead and use them that way.
That's it.
Okay. All right, I think we covered all of the questions. Thank you so much for joining me today for this Facebook Live. I'm really excited about the FaLaLa Sew Along. If Silver Lining Sew Along is any indication, you guys were just so creative with those blocks. I loved every week coming into the Sew Quilty Friends group and seeing what you guys had made with your blocks for the Silver Lining Sew Along. So we are now today officially in the FaLaLa Sew Along. Can't wait to see what you guys are making. If you have any additional questions, you could post them in the comments of this video, and we will try to get back here a little bit later and check on the comments. So, okay, thanks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.